that. And I want to say hello and welcome to everyone who's joining us today. You know, I've been in the field of DEI for over 25 years, and I've found that the key to getting 100% from 100% of your people 100% of the time is diversity, equity, and inclusion. Now, I know some people have said that 100% goal is a bit high, but what else would you shoot for? I mean, if we're paying people 100% of their salary and wages, we want to make sure that we're getting 100% of everything they have to contribute. So we need to make sure that the DEI initiative is set up to succeed. I want to open with this quote from this wonderful woman by the name of Dr. Linda Bing, who says that every organization has diversity, equity, and inclusion to some degree. And that's true. The issue is how much and are they leveraging it as a source of strength? Because in every organization, DEI will be a source of strength or a source of weakness, but it will not be neutral. So I want to tell you a little bit about my background and how I got to that. So you can see some of the demographic information and the accolades and achievements, but what I really want you to know is just a little bit about my story. Every organization has a story, just as people do. And before we get to your organizational stories, I want to talk a little bit about my story as an individual. I think the first line up there is the one that's most important to me. I'm a Black Christian female, cisgender, wife, mother, and grandmother, and I bring my whole self to everything that I do. So I say that to give you a better perspective of what you're about to hear today. But I was born, I live in the Atlanta area, but I'm originally from New York City. I'm the youngest of four. And when I was born, my family lived in the Marcy housing projects in Brooklyn. When I was about 4.5 years old, my family moved from the Marcy into a single family home in a middle-class Black neighborhood. And after a while, I started going to private schools. I excelled. And when I was in high school, I graduated from the 11th grade. I skipped the 12th grade. I was the valedictorian of my graduating class, and I went on to Smith College in Northampton, Massachusetts. So Smith, being an Ivy League, predominantly white at the time, women's college, the Black Student Association wanted to make sure that incoming freshmen of color were prepared for what they were about to experience. So there was a program. The program was called Bridge. It was 2 weeks before classes start. So I had just turned 17. Now I'm leaving home for the first time, going to a new state, this new experience with college, so much newness. And in that 2-week period, there was a question that was asked of me that still resonates with me today. And in fact, sort of indirectly, probably had something to do with shaping my career. I am the founder and CEO of Turning Point Leadership Group, which is an organizational development consulting and training firm. And we specialize in diversity, equity, and inclusion and relationship management. I've done counseling, I've done coaching, I've been on radio in Atlanta on B103. I was sort of the Frasier down here. People would call in and ask questions about love and relationships. I'm the doctor that gave them the response. I've written a couple of books, articles. I mean, all of this stuff in the diversity space. And I think a lot of it hinges on this one question. So they put signs around the room and they asked us to pick the sign with which we identify the strongest. And so two of the signs that stuck out for me, one was woman, the other was African American. Now, how many people in their lifetime have ever had to split themselves and decide which of those do I identify with the strongest? But even then, at just being, newly 17 by 1 month, I knew that I had more similarities with my Black brothers than I did with my white sisters. I knew that in a pinch, if there were resources given, or, I was pretty militant back in the day, and I used to feel like when the revolution comes, who's going to have my back? But my point is, few people have to decide, because so many people go through life not needing to segment themselves into different sections in order to understand how to prepare, how to operate, how to show up. That is one of the things that really propelled me into DEI work and wanting to do some sort of DEI initiatives across the country. So let me just tell you an overview of what we're going to talk about today. I want to make sure that I level set and we're all on the same page with what is a DEI initiative. We want to look at some common barriers and reasons why they're not as successful as they could be. Sometimes I'll go into organizations and people will say things like, we've been working on DEI for 20 years, and they want to pat themselves on the back. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. I think there's a certain level of applause that they should receive. However, when you look at the numbers, how much progress have you made in those 20 years? If you went to a physician and you said, I've got a rash and I've had this rash for a while, and 20 years later, your doctor still hasn't found a way to cure that rash, you need a new doctor. Something is wrong with the process. And I'm here to say that if you're not making headway after years and years and years in the DEI space, there might be a problem. We're also going to take a look at what success looks like. And I'm going to introduce you to the way we do things at Turning Point Leadership Group. Not to say that that is the right way or the only way, but I do want to give you my perspective. As I said, I've been in the field over 25 years. In fact, the topic of my doctoral dissertation was on diversity. I've worked internally in different organizations as a diversity practitioner, so I understand that perspective. And then most of my career, I've been external as a consultant and then having my own firm. So I certainly understand that perspective as well. And I bring all of that, the academic, the internal, the external, bring that all together when crafting strategies for organizations. So what is a DEI initiative? First, let's look at what is an initiative. And again, I know that intuitively we understand this, but let's make sure we're all on the same page. So when we think about an initiative, it is a new plan or process. And I'm going to stop right there because many times organizations don't really have a plan. They may have some sort of process where they're doing diversity training, unconscious bias training, but they really don't have a long-term plan, and they're not always sure what problem they want to solve. Well, an initiative is a new plan or process to achieve something or solve a problem. And we're familiar with initiatives. We have them in safety, continuous improvement, ESG, healthcare. There are all kinds of initiatives taking place. We also know that if we're doing a DEI initiative, this DEI initiative is a plan or process that should include a strategic plan. You have to have a strategic plan. And while that sounds like a no-brainer, there are lots of places that don't have something written down. They don't have it aligned with the goals and objectives of the business. And they really don't know how they're going to achieve more diversity, more equity, and more inclusion. So just some of the things you need to think about are things like workforce planning. I've worked with organizations that did not have anyone even dedicated to the task of workforce planning. So who is analyzing and forecasting the supply and demand when it comes to people and the skills and the gaps that they need to fill? Excuse me. We need to make sure that this plan touches on everything like recruiting and onboarding and succession planning. I had a conversation yesterday with a prospective client who was telling me that, and he works for a major hospital in the Midwest, and he was telling me that they don't even have a formal succession planning process in the hospital. So if you're not doing this in a formal way, are you just picking and choosing your favorites? Are you just picking and choosing people who speak the loudest? What is the process? And if you don't have a formal succession plan, then how are you making sure that DE&I is a part of it? Training, something we're going to talk about to a great extent, and even your employee resource groups. I've noticed that in some organizations, employee resource groups are losing some of the business focus. And I think that's why some companies are starting to call them business resource groups. I don't think we need to change the name. I think we need to change the practices. So for example, I heard of a company that presented at a conference a couple of weeks ago. And the woman who was presenting talked about the fact, I apologize, I don't know where all this in my throat is coming from. The woman who was presenting talked about the fact that they have a group, let's say for gardening. Now,
recording in progress.
Unless your group is one that, or unless your organization is one that needs to increase the representation of people in the gardening field in your workforce, you don't need an ERG for gardening. ERGs need to have their goals and objectives aligned with the overall business goals and objectives. They need to be moving the organization where the business needs to go. When you have a DEI initiative, you should have clear goals and objectives. You need to have appropriate measurement, which is something we're going to talk about, and there needs to be some accountability. So before we go into more detail on that, I want you to watch this 5-minute video on some of the common mistakes and some of the things that cause DEI programs to fail. And I'm going to just ask you, notice what you notice, because when the video's over, I will ask you to put into the chat, what are some of the things that you heard and that resonate with you?
You can't hear the sound. Dr. Bean, you can't hear the sound.
You can't hear the sound.
No.
Okay, I'm not sure why that is. Hold on.
You can click when you share your when you share your screen again when the video is playing. You go normally when you share your screen, click on share sound, and that should help you.
I don't know how it got unclicked. Thank you.
Okay.
All right, and I will go back to the beginning. Now I got to restart my audio. Hold on.
Three reasons diversity programs fail. My name is Ian. I have 15 years leadership experience in various roles up to senior management.
Grow up leadership.
Over my tenure, I participated in many diversity and inclusion trainings and discussions. I want to start by saying I am a proponent of diversity in the workplace. There has been substantial research to indicate the benefits of diversity with higher profits, innovation, staff retention. I think it's important to shed light on the larger problem with diversity and 3 reasons why diversity programs fail. There are a number of business articles that continue to be published illustrating the ineffectiveness of diversity trainings and programs. Here are my own observations as someone in various leadership roles. First, what's the outcome you're trying to achieve? Increasing awareness? Increasing diverse staffing? If it's awareness of what? The existence of bias and microaggressions? The importance of increasing diversity in the workplace? Also, does the outcome you are setting align with the diverse communities you're trying to support and help? People from diverse populations, the ones I've spoken to along with the research I've come across, indicate that the outcome they want to see and what they feel will truly improve diversity is increasing diversity at the decision-making table, meaning increasing diversity at the senior, executive, C-suite level of leadership. The idea is that those diverse decision makers will offer diverse ideas, influence diverse decisions, and develop and promote further diversity. Increasing awareness about diversity, stereotypes, bias, microaggressions are all helpful to the larger problem and a great first step, but they're not the outcome or solution that many diverse folks are actually looking for. Second, what's the long-term plan to measure and achieve the stated outcome? Most diversity programs or initiatives provide training to raise awareness, which again is a great first step, but they stop there. There's no next steps. I see this issue with many corporate initiatives. The CEO or someone from the C-level promotes a company-wide initiative for leadership development or diversity inclusion or the latest management theory from famous organizational psychologists, researchers, experts, or consulting firms. There's plenty of communication about purpose and importance, followed by training, but That's where it ends and usually dies. There's no long-term plan for ongoing support or even a way to measure success and effectiveness. I'm in no way knocking the purpose and intent of initiatives for staff development and diversity and inclusion. These are so helpful and necessary, but again, the issue in my experience and observation is there is no long-term plan, or should I say no long-term plan is implemented. The realities and urgencies and fires and changes and priorities of everyday work quickly swing back into focus, and the priority of diversity or development moves to the back burner, to eventually being put in some Tupperware and stuck in the freezer. Sorry, too much. Point is, most diversity programs offer a great start with training to diversity awareness, unintentional biases, and microaggressions. The intended audience, and let's be real here, mainly intended for white people, would often respond with a feeling and reaction of, look, I'm highly open and accepting of diversity. I'm over here listening to rap music and Selena and K-pop, eating tacos, dim sum, halal falafels, chicken vindaloo, while watching Squid Games and Wu-Tang American Saga, all while celebrating Pride Month and Indigenous Day. And look, it's awesome that we've become so open, embracing, celebrating of cultures and diversity from all around the world. But here's the divide, the gap. When you are in a hiring process for promoting a new leader and that candidate looks, acts, thinks, communicates differently than you should be saying, that's what I want. I want someone different than me. Someone with a different perspective, different viewpoint, different ideas, different way of communicating, a different way of doing things. That is an outcome you want to achieve with a diversity program. This leads to the third reason. What's the incentive? I was in management for many, many years as a manager, senior manager, and I was involved and saw the hiring of many leadership positions. When faced with a diverse candidate, what I saw sometimes from the hiring manager, and I'm completely certain there was no ill intent or intended bias, but the concern from the hiring manager was that this person's communication, their ideas, don't align with the current communication and work culture. Their concerns were about differences that would create challenges. It is in our nature to look for people who think, agree, and communicate like us, particularly when it's something important to us like work. And for senior leaders, work is important. Getting work done is important. The quest for ongoing homogenous thinking in order to simply get shit done with the least resistance is probably the biggest obstacle to increasing diversity on all levels of an organization.
All right, so I'm going to stop the share right there and just see, put in chat, just tell me some of the things that struck you as a result of that. Ian, whose style is a little different than you may have expected. He's not your average corporate person, and neither was his presentation, but just tell me some of the things that struck you as you heard him talking about reasons why diversity initiatives fail. All right, Alice says you have to have buy-in and support from moving so fast, upper levels. Yes, awareness ain't enough. That's so true, Tish. White fragility. Yeah, great book. No long-term plan put in place. Most DEI training in the workplace caters to white folks. Yes, for some reason, people of color tend to think that this initiative is not for us. We don't need to go to training. That's a big myth. People are resistant to change, lack of long-term planning. All of that stuff is so spot on. You guys are so right. These are some of the reasons why we know this, yet we're still struggling in our organizations to make sure that some of that stuff actually happens. Defining the community in which you're training and building is crucial. Yes, making assumptions that there is buy-in at the top. So let me go back to sharing, and I want to make sure that we take a look at what are some of those things all in a nutshell. So look at some, if I pull together a lot of what Ian said and look at the research, these are the top 3 common reasons that DEI plans fail in the research that I did. One is, as many of you said, lack of clarity regarding what you want to achieve. We throw training at everything, and training is necessary, but it's not sufficient to solve the problem. The training tends to be focused on awareness, and that's a good start, but awareness is not meant to be the end of the process. And many times what we train on is not what we measure, and it's not the desired outcome. So for instance, if we are training on awareness about unconscious biases, but what we really want is diversity in our decision makers. How is that going to transfer from the classroom to the shop floor? We need to have a call to action. And many times there's lack of clarity, not only around what that action should be, but how we get there. And the research shows that about 41% of companies say that they have a lack of training. A second one, as some of you also heard in the video, is no long-range plan. Leaders have to integrate the values into the organizational objectives. There have to be resources set aside for it. They've got to integrate current events into leadership training. So let's take a look at the fact that just last week, September 21st, was Black Women's Equal Pay Day. We already know that pay equity is an issue, but we have not always separated out the dates pertaining to the different ethnic groups of women. So Women's Equal Pay Day has already occurred because that's the average. Black Women's Equal Pay Day was just September 21st, and Latino Women's Equal Pay Day isn't until December 8th. What that means is a Latina woman who started working January of 2021 needs to work until December 8th of 2022. That's almost 2 full years in order to make the equivalent of what a white male in the same occupation made just in 2021 alone. Now, many times we think of these initiatives as just being the right thing to do or the nice thing to do. This is life and death. And that's really what I want people to understand. DEI is about life and death, because now that Latina woman has to make difficult choices. She has to decide where she can afford to live, how she can afford to feed her family. Do I pay rent or do I buy medicine that my children might need? Those types of decisions are all going into her mind because she's not making what her white male counterpart is making, but she's doing the same work, same level, equal experience and education, et cetera. And that's why when organizations put out these nice platitudes, statements like after George Floyd was murdered about how we stand with our Black brothers and sisters, or after the AAPI, hostile events that were taking place, we stand with the AAPI community. What does that mean? Standing with us is a nice thing to say, but what's the long range plan to make sure that we are affecting equity in employment, which is going to then lead to things like education and healthcare and housing, et cetera. And then, and I should mention that 43% of the people surveyed said that lack of commitment, which is evidenced by no long-range plan, was a problem. And then the last one, which 41% of the people said they have no metrics, is affinity for homogeneity. We, just human nature, we are drawn to things that we think are like us. So many times someone might get a leg up on a subconscious level because they went to the same school or university that we attended, or maybe they come from the same hometown, or maybe whatever, just a number of different things. But everyone must have a seat at the table. And a DEI program cannot succeed in the absence of adequate representation of diverse groups of people. And it can't just be this performative allyship where we're just putting people in places to make it look good. I got a question asked of me the other day about how did it make me feel that there's now a Black Little Mermaid? They've got Ariel in the movies. Doesn't make me feel one way or the other. I think it's great that little girls of color get to see someone who looks like them when they watch movies, but is that little girl of color going to have equal access when she's trying to get a job, when she's trying to feed her family, et cetera? So the top 3 reasons: lack of clarity regarding what you want to achieve. Second one, no long-range plan. Third one, no affinity for homogeneity. So another opportunity. I'm going to ask you a question and ask that you put your responses in the chat. So does your organization provide awareness training? And if so, awareness of what? What's the basis of the training that's provided? So let's get some things going in the chat. Not yet, okay. So there's one response from Bridget that not yet, her company's not doing. And I know sometimes there's a lag in the chat. So if that's not what you are responding to, Bridget, you can let me know. But what about others? Are you getting some kind of awareness training? Is there unconscious bias training? Okay, simply that bias and stereotypes exist. No, a variety training, but none dubbed for awareness. So again, see, even in 2022, whereas, like I said, I've been in this field over 25 years, I'm thinking that many companies are well beyond this. And again, we're seeing some evidence here, as well as what the data shows, that people still are not getting proper training when it comes to diversity and inclusion. So question number 2, I won't go back to the slide, but let me just ask you, does your organization measure the effectiveness of the training? And if so, how? Do they measure the effectiveness of the training? And if they're measuring it, how are they measuring it? Okay, so in the process of integrating the training into local agency, implicit bias, pre-test and post-test. Okay, I'm going to speak to that. That's a good one, Ayana. Post surveys, post-session survey, we don't measure it. No, they are not measuring it. So again, if they're not measuring, how do they know whether they're set up to succeed or fail? We measure other things. We measure profitability. We measure turnover. We measure things that are important to us. So why are we not measuring this? There are so many in here that are saying that no measurement is happening, and that should be a red flag for you. That should be a serious red flag. So let me show you a little bit of information. Now, those of you who might be familiar with training and how you establish training curriculums and so forth would be familiar with this model. This is a model developed by Kirkpatrick. It's the 4 levels of measuring training effectiveness. So level 1 is reaction. That's what we're measuring at a level 1. What's your reaction? That's basically the feedback sheet at the end. That's basically the evaluation form. And we call them in the industry, we call it a smile sheet, because basically we're looking to see, were you happy or not happy? And that's, you don't get a lot of information from that. It really could depend on whether they could vibe with the facilitator or not. Did they like the content that was presented? Was the room too cold? Was the lunch good? All of those things factor in. Level 2 is learning. So those of you who are doing pre and post tests, that's a level 2. And really, you can't tell whether or not someone's learning unless you first measure their understanding of certain concepts before you train them, and then measure them again after the pre and the post. Level 3 is behavior. Are their behaviors changing? Are they still saying and doing things that are microaggressions? Are they still leaving people out or treating people in different ways instead of treating them equitably? And level 4 is the money. Are we making a return on our investment? Can we see increased productivity or profitability as a result of the training? That's a very, very difficult thing to measure for any type of soft skills training, let alone DEI training. Many times companies want to go there and they want to talk about the ROI, but they leave out the fact that it's difficult to measure for any type of training. That's just another form of resistance or another stall tactic to keep from having to get uncomfortable with DEI training. So when we're doing awareness work, one of the problems is we usually measure at a level 1 reaction, but the outcome that we want is level 3. We want a behavior change, but there's been no call to action. There's been no skills-based training. We have not done anything to teach you how to lead across a generational mix, or how do you empower women to lead. We haven't given you the skills, but we want to measure your behavioral change. And all we've done is raise your level of awareness. So hopefully you can see the inconsistency in that. You can't do level 1 work and then want to measure on a level 3 and then come back and say, well, the DEI is not working, because you're not measuring effectively. You've got to have appropriate measurement. So here's a chart that takes a look at some of that stuff. This is asking people whether or not their organization measures certain things. And I want to point out to you, way at the bottom, 16% of the organizations surveyed said that they do not measure DEI. So if you said that in the chat, you're not alone. It's not a good thing, but you're not alone. Most people measure basic workforce data. 56% look at things that are legally protected, like are we, do we have good numbers or good representation with respect to gender and race and ethnicity, those types of things. That's diversity. That doesn't give you any indication of equity and inclusion. Or looking at things like the third one down, diversity within the leadership ranks, again, doesn't tell you anything about equity or inclusion. looking at things like diversity goals related to succession planning or management. 23% of the companies that were talked to are doing that. Equal job titles, advanced workforce data, et cetera. So we have a long way to go. Only on one, the basic workforce data, tracking how many of these and how many of those, checking the boxes, that's the only one that's above 50%. My third question, what else has your organization done besides awareness training? And I would like to see some of that in the chat. So let's see, what else is your organization doing in the space of DEI besides the training? Anything else going on besides training? Started a new DEI department. Okay, that's a good thing. Changed hiring policies where we recruit, how our HR investigations are run. Representative from the organization attends a monthly DEI roundtable with other leaders. Good. We have a DEI committee. These are all good things. They're good next steps. Creating affinity space, paid committee focused on equity and inclusion, reviewing policies and practices. Okay, getting leaders certified. Interesting. In DEIB, we will be hiring a DEIB role. Okay, so they're moving in that direction, which is a good thing. I'm going to show you a little bit more data with respect to that. Allows you to see how you're doing up against others. Now, the blue bar represents high, and that sort of purple magenta color is very high. So to what degree does your organization use the following initiatives? Again, I'm going to draw your attention to the fact that only 6% include DEI in succession planning and management process. How are we getting women and people of colors, folks from the LGBTQ plus community, people with disabilities, veterans, how are we getting these other groups into management positions if we're not doing succession planning? And if there's no DEI element to the succession planning? So there are some things that are being done, but again, look at the percentages. The highest one is 35%. Consistently communicate the importance of DEI throughout the organization. You know, when we think about measurement and levels of measurement, if I go back to that chart from Kirkpatrick, think about if we're talking about it and we're raising awareness, is that enough to get the job done? So I have 2 sons and a bonus daughter through marriage. Didn't have the pleasure of raising my bonus daughter, but my sons, we did raise. I raised my sons. So let's just say that the garage is dirty. If I were to take one of my boys when they were growing up, say in their middle school, high school years, and show them that the garage was dirty, I could point out the mud, the dirt, the leaves that have blown in, the dust on the shelves out there. I could show them all of that. That's not a call to action. By pointing out to them that the garage is dirty is not going to get my garage clean. I could even help them see what they did to contribute to it. You leave the garage door open and the wind blows the leaves in. You come in your muddy boots instead of hosing them off outside. You track in dirt. You know, your cleats are dirty. There are all kinds of things I could show them. Raising their level of awareness or consistently talking about the importance of a clean garage is not going to get my garage clean. However, if I call to action, if I say, I need you to clean that garage, that might get it done when they felt like it, you know, at their pace, which might not be my pace. But if there's measurement and accountability, either by giving an incentive or some consequence. So if I were to say, if you clean the garage in the next 30 minutes, I'll give you $100. I would have a clean garage in 30 minutes. Or if I said, if the garage is not clean in 30 minutes, you're grounded for a week. The garage will be clean in 30 minutes. There's not much difference here. When we talk about it, when we raise awareness, but there's no call to action and no accountability, nothing gets done. Now, this one, I won't come back off and ask you to go into chat again, but I'm wondering, what's the makeup of your C-suite? What's it look like? How diverse is your C-suite? Because again, if there's commitment at the top, we're going to make some changes. Now, many times, what leadership wants to point out is the fact that, well, these things take time. Nothing's going to happen overnight. All of that is true. However, there are some things that we can mandate. If OSHA comes in and says, you need to clean this up and we're giving you 30 days to do it, it will be done in 30 days. And they really don't care about your psychological safety. They don't care how you feel about it. They don't care if people's feelings are hurt. They're going to get it done. So why can't we do the same thing with DEI? I was at a conference and I heard a gentleman who's the VP of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at a Southern university. And he mentioned that after the George Floyd murder, the president of the college gave folks 2 days. He said, we're taking down these Confederate statues and we are changing the names of buildings on our campus that give honor to Confederate soldiers. And in 2 days, it was done. That is a diversity move, and I applaud them for it. But if we could do that, we could make other moves as well. Not everything takes 10, 15, 20 years to get done. So again, in talking to organizations, now this time the magenta looking bar is someone that's seen as a low performer in DEI. And what that means is on the survey, people rated their companies as being either underdeveloped or beginning in the process, or they were intermediate but not very advanced. The blue bar for the DEI high performers, that meant just the opposite. They rated them as being advanced or expert. And still, even those who are rated as advanced or expert, if you look across or look down the list, they still didn't rate them as being over 50% when it comes to sufficient prioritization of leadership levels, inadequate training, lack of a leader to oversee or champion the initiatives, all of these things. I was reading an article the other day that said that the executives of companies that were surveyed feel like they are in support of employee resource groups. However, the employee resource group leaders did not feel like they had executive support. So we need to have conversations and get on the same page to be able to understand, because sometimes leaders will look at what's being done. They look at activity and they think that we're successful. They're not looking at the outcome and the results. They're not checking on how people feel. They're not looking at what are the measurable outcomes and are people really having a sense of belonging. So there are differing opinions with respect to whether the initiative is a success or not. Why does all this matter? Why even care? Why are we spending time talking about this today? One reason is because only 22% of companies surveyed indicated that they're expert or advanced in these stages. This is not a new field. You know, if I've been in it myself, and I'm not the pioneer, but if I've been in it for over 25 years, that means it's been around for a long time. So why are only 22% of the companies surveyed seeing themselves as being advanced? Only 40% of companies offer DEI-related learning and development opportunities to all employees. Sometimes it's only given at the top. We train executives and managers, but we don't go all the way down through the organization. Again, dealing in hospitals, we've done a fair amount of work in hospital settings. And sometimes I hear that we don't have the ability to pull like the techs and the orderlies and people at lower levels in the organization away from their jobs for diversity training the same way we might be able to do for, you know, nursing supervisors and some of the physicians, et cetera. And you can't afford not to. I mean, think about it. When someone shows up, you might be a very exclusive hospital that even has valet parking for certain, you know, patient populations. That is something that if that valet doesn't have the right attitude, if that valet looks at certain people as if to say, how can you afford this car? Or if that valet doesn't necessarily want to touch or help someone based on whatever feelings they have about the demographic group that they belong to, that shades the whole hospital experience, and they haven't even gotten into the building yet. So if your orderlies and your techs and other people are not inclusive and treating everyone equitably, if people are refusing to call people by their appropriate pronouns because they don't physically appear to fit that pronoun, or their birth gender on their record doesn't match the gender that they are affiliated with, bad choice of words, not affiliated with, but if they're going through transition, a transgender person going through transition. So if they are becoming their true selves now, and that was not reflected on the birth certificate, Those kinds of things make a difference. And so we can't just afford to train certain levels or just train HR and not train line personnel. We've got to make smarter decisions about this. Only 45% say that their workforce reflects the demographics of today's marketplace. Companies are missing the opportunity to offer benefits that appeal to a diverse workforce, with 18% offering only those benefits mandated by law. And only 30% say their businesses invest in understanding their pay equity gap to a high or very high degree, something that we've spoken a little bit about already. We know that there are benefits to the employees. This is sort of a general list. The important thing here is you need to think about what are our reasons for doing this? What benefits do we want our employees to get, and align those benefits with your goals and your success measures to make sure that they're being achieved. So what does success look like? And if you've got any questions, by all means, please put them in the chat. I will take some questions at the end. But what does success look like? So here are just a few things. First, you have diversity at all levels and across all departments. This is important because we tend to think about it just in terms of the vertical. And we want to make sure that from the bottom to the top of the organization, we have diversity, and that is important. But is diversity largely within your staff positions and not your line positions? When you look at most organizations, you'll find that women and people of color are heavy in HR, communications, again, the staff positions, but the line positions like sales, engineering, manufacturing, are they in those positions as well? Do they control the budgets? Do they make decisions? So this is not just about representation, that's important, but we want them in all decision-making roles across the organization. And we need to look at the fact that women need to be segmented. Many organizations might have a woman or two in the C-suite, but typically it's a white woman. The issues and challenges that white women face in the organization are not the same challenges that women of color face. That's why I gave you my story in the beginning. And when you think about it, as a woman of color, many times we have to decide, even when we think about ERGs and which ERG to join. Do I go into an ERG for African Americans, or do I go into an ERG for women? Will the women's ERG really appeal to the challenges that I have? Do they understand that not only am I facing sexism, but I'm facing racism as well? So all of these things go into play. Success means you should have a satisfied, engaged employee population with high morale. Your employees should be more knowledgeable, more inclusive. You should not only have equitable policies, but equitable practices. In fact, you can have equitable practices even if your policies aren't equitable. It's just all how you treat people. And of course, increased productivity and profitability are important for success as well. These are some steps. And I do have for you, you'll see it a little bit later on, I attempted to send it to Amber as she requested, but the file with the PowerPoint slide was too large, so it didn't go through, but I will make sure that she has that so that when we get to the checklist, you will have a handout of the checklist as well, and that's coming up in a few slides. But here are some steps. And these are things we talked about. You need the strategic plan as well as some implementation techniques. People need skills. They need to understand how to have difficult conversations. They need to understand how to coach people who are not like them, how to mentor people not like them. All of those things, however you define not like me, those are part of your DEI initiative. You need clear definitions, goals, and outcomes, diverse representation up and down and from side to side. Evaluate and measure success, process of accountability, and create a culture that not only tolerates or welcomes or some of the softer words, but one that actually craves diverse and inclusive thinking. Tell you a little bit about the approach at Turning Point Leadership Group. We like to begin with an assessment. How do you know that you've arrived if you don't know where you're starting from? You have to know where you're starting from. So we created and we use some other assessments as well, but we created a little 10-minute assessment that you take online that gives two things that work well for us. One is it tells us how employees view the culture. Do they think that their culture is stuck in diversity, So we're getting representation, but there's not a lot of equity and inclusion, so people don't feel like they're belonging? Or which of those four, DEI or B, are most of your employees saying is a snapshot of your culture today? The second thing that quick assessment gives us is people's attitudes towards DEI. Are you a traditionalist? There are four of them, and it ranges from traditionalist to advocate. So are you someone who believes in the status quo? If it ain't broke, don't fix it, and it ain't broke, it's working for me and mine? Or are you somebody who you see it, you understand it, and you're advocating for it? The reason that's important, couple of reasons. One is when we know where people are, we can do a better job of crafting what type of awareness you need. And we get a better understanding of how quickly or how slowly we might be able to change your culture. Because to some extent, you do have to meet people where they are. You give them a little bit of a push, but you don't want to knock them over. So if we know that your organization is full of advocates, what we're doing needs to have a quick pace to it because they're ready to go. We understand this. We're ready to know how to make some change. Whereas at the opposite end, the traditionalists need to first really understand it. Yeah, I hear what you're saying, but show me why this is important. And believe it or not, there's still a lot of people in that space today. I mean, you could just look at current events and see there are a lot of people still in that space today. So after the snapshot, we're able to do a better job of tailoring your awareness education. We encourage you to start some sort of DEI council. Some of you mentioned that that's happening in your organizations. And we want you to start formulating ERGs, employee resource groups. We provide leadership training for ERG leaders, because not only do you know how to lead in general, but you need to know how to lead a group of people that you really don't have any direct authority over. They're a group of volunteers. How do you lead them and still get the outcomes that you want? And how do you develop your goals and objectives so that they are in alignment with the business goals and objectives? We offer, under our program called Energize, we offer free monthly webinars for anyone. It's mostly ERG leaders and members who attend. It's always the second Tuesday of every month, 12 Eastern. This year, well, we started last year in March. So for almost 2 years, they've been free. We're now starting a membership program. Those webinars will still be free next year, but we're adding on other things to make the Energize program more robust. And some of those other things will only be available through membership. But the council, the ERGs, those are other groups that can assist the DEI department. Someone in the chat had mentioned that they have a new DEI department. I've been in charge of DEI departments, and many times they are very small. You're lucky if you have 3 or 4 people in your DEI organization, but then you've got thousands of people in the organization. So having some of these ad hoc groups helps with the heavy lifting. Now, in addition to that, once we're done with awareness training, the education process doesn't stop there. We do senior leadership team briefings. And one of my clients, the first year we did monthly briefings with the SLT. This year we're doing quarterly briefings, but we want to keep them engaged and focus on how DEI is impacting their business and how business is impacting DEI in their organization. We do skills-based training for managers, and we do refresher courses online for individuals. Classroom training typically can happen every 2 or 3 years, but you need to have other things going on in the meantime so that it doesn't feel like a flavor of the month or one and done. And the same way in organizations that are big on safety, there are safety briefings every month into perpetuity, because safety is important. This needs to be just as important. Diversity Dialogues is a product that we have where we give you the script, the PowerPoint slides, and any handouts, any intended responses, so that as a leader, you start not only developing your muscle around this, but you become seen as a go-to person in your organization. We don't want to live in your organization forever. We want you to learn how to make this a natural part of what you do. So Diversity Dialogues help you to have those conversations with your team. And again, online courses to help. So let's recap. You need a plan or a process, be clear about what you want to achieve, align the measurements to the process, have a long-term plan, develop diverse representation at every level and across all lines of the business. This is the checklist that I said you will get as a handout. It does not have everything. And of course, there are some things that really are specific to your industry, your part of the world, your developmental stage in this and a lot of other things. But you can get a sense of what are some of the things that are necessary and where are we measuring up? If we only have 2 or 3 on the list, we have a long way to go. And only having 2 or 3 is not necessarily bad because Dr. Samuel Chand says failure is the womb of success. So in other words, your success is birthed from multiple failures. So if you feel like right now our current state is not as successful as we like it to be, it's okay. Just understand what are the steps that you need to take and be about a plan and some measurement to make sure that you take those steps. So before I take your questions, I do want to thank you for your time and attention. I also want to make a shameless plug and let you know that my second book is now available. This QR code actually was for ordering it in pre-sale, but I just got an email 2 days ago that it is on Amazon now. So I haven't received my hard copies of it yet, but the book is called Tame Your Tongue and Transform Your Organization: How to Close the Employee Inclusion Gap. Years ago, I wrote a book called Tame Your Tongue and Transform Your Relationship. And in that book, there are 4 tongues that are identified. And depending on how much you speak and how much compassion you have when you speak, you're either speaking life or death into your relationships. Same thing happens with your organization. Your words can be a form of microaggressions, or they can be a form of encouragement and uplifting. And that's what this book is about. There's also a free assessment that we're going to be adding to the website so that you're able to take the assessment to see which of those 4 tongues you have. And then I want to tell you about an upcoming event on November 1st from 11:30 to 1:30 Eastern. We are doing a free virtual ERG summit and award ceremony. And our keynote is our own Leah Smiley. Leah also happens to sit on the board for Turning Point Leadership Group, but she will be making the keynote. And then we're going to have 4 breakout sessions, and each participant will get to go to 2 of the 4. And these breakout sessions are not presentations, they are roundtable discussions. So you will be in a breakout room with peers talking about either the top challenges of today's ERGs and how to overcome them, or the intersectionality of ERGs, within the LGBTQ plus community, for instance. There are different levels of microaggressions and different levels of discrimination. Transgender people talk about more discrimination than, say, gay and lesbian people. And so what's the intersectionality that exists even within? How inclusive are we within an ERG? There'll be one on actions that make your ERG an asset to an organization, and one on creating meaningful community impact. And then we're going to be giving out a few awards. So the link that you see there is to a JOT form so that you can nominate your ERG or some other ERG. We're going to give out 3. One for the most improved ERG. Where were you when you started? Maybe it was just you and an idea, and now you've got 20 people and you're doing all kinds of things. We want to give out one for the most creative event. What is something you came up with that people just loved and you had not seen it before? And one for community impact. We want to know who's making a difference, not just internally, but for the constituent group that you represent outside in the community. So again, I thank you. If you have questions beyond today, you want to learn more about our products and services, you want to sign up for the ERG monthly free webinars, or maybe for the summit that's coming up, that QR code will take you to the registration page to sign up for it. But if by some chance you can't take a picture of that now, or it doesn't work for you, just get in touch. Here is my email address. You can feel free to email me, call my office, be happy to engage with you and answer any questions that you might have. So with